My name is Margot Voss. I am 34 years old. And 8 months ago, I walked into my family's annual board dinner wearing the same pair of canvas overalls I had worn to sand drawer fronts that morning, sawdust on my boots, linseed oil under my fingernails. My brother Elliot looked at me from across the table and said loud enough for every person in the room to hear, "Somebody let the help in." 11 people laughed. My mother smiled into her wine. My sister Phoebe lifted her phone and filmed me standing in the doorway like I was content. I sat down anyway. I ate the bread. I did not say a word for 2 hours and 40 minutes. The next morning, a lawyer I had never met drove 90 miles to our workshop, asked to see me by name, and placed a brown envelope on the workbench between a wood plane and a can of Danish oil. He said 4 sentences. By the time he finished the 4th one, the sawdust on my boots was worth more than my brother's business degree. My family spent the rest of that year learning something my grandfather had tried to teach them for decades. Wood remembers who touched it. Before I go on, do something small for me, like this video, and drop a comment telling me where you are listening from and what time it is. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to the workshop, the one that started all of this. My grandfather built his first table in 1971 in a 1-car garage in Cordon, Ohio, with a circular saw he had borrowed from a neighbor and a piece of black walnut he had pulled out of a creek bed after a storm. He did not have a business plan. He did not have a website. He did not have a brand. He had a chisel and an opinion about joinery that he would defend until the day he died, and an old pair of canvas overalls the color of tobacco leaves that he wore every single morning of his working life. The table sold for $40 to a woman who ran a boarding house on Maple Street. She kept it for 52 years. When she died, her daughter called my grandfather to tell him the table was still level. He hung up the phone and he cried in the shop for 10 minutes. I know this because I was there. I was 11. I was sitting on the stool by the finishing station doing homework I did not want to do. He wiped his eyes on his sleeve and looked at me and said, "Margot, that is the only review that matters." I wrote it in the margin of my math worksheet. I still have the worksheet. The shop grew slowly, the way things grow when nobody is watering them except the person doing the work. By 1986, Voss & Sons Custom Woodworks had 4 employees, a real building on Ridgewater Road with a loading dock and a hand-painted sign my grandfather had lettered himself, and a reputation in 3 counties for building furniture that your grandchildren would fight over. The sign was green with gold letters. The gold had faded by the time I was born. My grandfather never repainted it. He said a sign that needed repainting was a sign that was doing too much talking. My grandfather's name was Arthur Voss. He had hands the size of oven mitts, and a voice that could fill a room or drop to a whisper depending on what he was teaching you. When he was showing you how to read the grain, he whispered. When he was telling you to keep your fingers away from the blade, he did not. He wore the same canvas overalls every day, tobacco brown. He replaced them once a year, same brand, same color. He washed them on Sundays. He ironed them on Monday mornings before the shop opened. He said a man who did not respect his work clothes did not respect his work. I believed him when I was 9. I believed him when I was 19. I believe him now. The overalls hung on a hook by the shop door when he was not wearing them. The hook was a hand-forged iron hook he had made himself in 1974. It is still there. I hang my overalls on it every night. My father, his only son, was a different kind of man. Thomas Voss was smart in the way that smart people are sometimes smart, quickly and without depth. He could talk to a client for 45 minutes about wood species he had never touched. He could name the difference between white oak and red oak at a dinner party, but could not pick either one out of a lumber pile without reading the tag. He could price a job in his head faster than the estimator could do it on paper. He could sell. That was his gift, and it was a real gift, and I do not say that with contempt. He could sell anything he had not built. The problem was that he believed selling was the harder half. My grandfather believed building was the only half. They disagreed about this for 30 years in the quiet, stubborn way that fathers and sons disagree when neither one will say the actual sentence out loud. My father took over the business in 2004. My grandfather did not retire. My grandfather was simply no longer consulted. That is a different thing. A retirement has a dinner. What happened to my grandfather had a memo. My father moved the front office into a new building across the parking lot from the shop. He put carpet in it. He put his name on the door in a font my grandfather would never have chosen. He hired a receptionist named Diane who answered the phone. Voss and Sons, how may I direct your call? There were no sons in the building. There had never been sons. There were daughters, 3 of us, and 1 grandson who had been treated like a son since the day he figured out which parent to perform for. Elliot came first. My brother was 4 years older than me and had been raised like a crown prince in a country that manufactured nothing. My mother, Sandra, had decided before Elliot could walk that he was the intellectual of the family. She enrolled him in science camps. She drove him to tutoring 40 minutes each way 3 evenings a week. She framed his report cards on the hallway wall in matching black frames. When he got a B+ in AP chemistry, she called the teacher. When he got an A, she called the neighbors. When Elliot graduated from Ohio State with a degree in business administration, my mother hosted a dinner at the Italian restaurant on 5th Street and made a toast that lasted 6 minutes. I timed it on the clock above the bar because I was sitting at the far end of the table next to Diane, who had been invited out of politeness and who spent the entire toast folding her napkin into smaller and smaller squares. Diane looked at me once during the speech. She did not say anything. She did not need to. We understood each other perfectly. Phoebe was 2 years younger than me. She was the pretty one, or rather, she was the one who had been assigned that word early and had spent 25 years living comfortably inside it, the way a person lives inside a house they did not build but have decorated extensively. Phoebe photographed well. She knew lighting the way, I knew lumber. She could frame a shot of a chisel against a wood shaving and make it look like a page from a magazine that cost $14 at the airport. She started managing the company's social media in 2019, and within a year had turned our workshop into an aesthetic. Followers loved the slow shots of sawdust falling through afternoon light. They loved the close-ups of grain patterns. They loved the sound of a hand plane. They loved everything about the shop except the people who actually worked in it. In Phoebe's version of Voss and Sons, there were no sweat stains. There were no 14-hour days. There were no splinters pulled out under a fluorescent light at 9 p.m. with a pair of needle-nose pliers. There was only the aesthetic, the beautiful lie of effortless craft. I was the middle child. I was the one in overalls. I was the draft of a daughter my mother had not finished editing and had eventually stopped trying. My grandfather taught me to use a hand plane when I was 9. He put it in my hands and stood behind me and guided the stroke and said, "Feel when it bites. Do not push. Let it find the cut." By 12, I could identify 40 species of hardwood by smell alone. I could tell you whether a board had been kiln-dried or air-dried by pressing my thumbnail into the end grain. By 16, I was spending every afternoon and every summer in the shop while Elliot studied for the SATs upstairs and Phoebe learned to contour in the bathroom mirror. By 18, I had built my first commission piece on my own. A writing desk in cherry with hand-cut dovetails and a secret compartment in the back panel that the client had not asked for, but that my grandfather had insisted I include. He said a good piece of furniture should have at least one thing in it that nobody knows about. By 22, I had completed a 4-year apprenticeship under a master cabinet maker in Vermont named Aldous Crow, who had hands like my grandfather's and a silence like my grandfather's, and who on my last day handed me a set of marking gauges that had belonged to his own teacher and said, "Go home. They need you. They will not know they need you. Go anyway." I came home. My grandfather, by then 78, stood in the doorway of the shop the day I arrived. He did not hug me. He looked at my hands. He turned them over the way you turn over a board to check both faces. He looked at the calluses. He looked at the small scar on my left thumb from a chisel that had slipped in my second year. He nodded once. That was his version of a standing ovation. I went to work in the shop the next Monday. I have been there every weekday since. Every single one. I want to stop here for a moment. If you have ever been the one in the family who gets their hands dirty while someone else gets the credit, stay with me. This one is for you. My father ran the business the way he ran a conversation. Confidently, inaccurately, and without pausing for input. By 2018, the company had grown on paper. Revenue was up. The client list looked impressive on the wall of the carpeted office. Elliot had been given the title of operations director, which meant he sat in the office across from my father and sent emails with subject lines like Process Optimization Q3 and Scalability Framework Draft. I received these emails. I read none of them. I was busy building the things he was optimizing. Phoebe had been given the title of brand manager, which meant she posted photographs of things I had built and wrote captions about our family legacy underneath them. She never tagged me. She never named me. The hands in her photographs were always shot from angles that made them unidentifiable. They could have been anyone's hands. They were mine. My title was shop lead. I did not have business cards. I did not have a desk in the carpeted office. I did not attend client meetings. I was not invited to the annual board dinner. I did not appear on the company website. I was the person who made the thing that everyone else talked about. I was the verb in a family of nouns. I want to be precise about what I did each day, because nobody else in my family could tell you if you asked them. I opened the shop at 6:15 every morning. I turned on the lights in order. Overheads first, then the task lights over each bench, then the finishing bay. I started the coffee in the pot my grandfather had bought in 1993 that made coffee that tasted like it had been brewed in 1993. I reviewed the cut lists. I checked the lumber deliveries against the moisture readings, because if you do not check moisture content on incoming hardwood stock, you will build a beautiful dresser that warps in 6 months and splits in 12, and the client will not call your brother about it. They will call you. They always call you. I managed 4 craftsmen. I trained 2 apprentices. I sharpened blades. I calibrated the jointer and the planer every Monday. I designed 60% of the custom commissions by hand on drafting paper at a tilted desk my grandfather had built for himself in 1988, because I did not trust the KeyID software Elliot had purchased for $14,000, and because the software could not feel the difference between quarter sawn and flat sawn white oak with its fingers. I could. My fingers knew things that software would never learn. I finished every piece by hand. I applied every coat of oil myself. I rubbed each surface with 000 steel wool between coats until the grain rose and settled and rose again, and the finish felt like water over stone. And I signed every piece on the inside of the bottom drawer with a pencil mark my grandfather had taught me when I was 14. A small V inside a circle. Nobody ever saw it. Nobody was meant to see it. That was the point. It was not a signature for the buyer. It was a signature for the wood. Here is what my family saw. They saw a woman in overalls with sawdust in her hair who came to Thanksgiving dinner smelling like tongue oil and did not talk about her work at the table. They saw a woman who did not have a title worth printing. They saw a woman who had chosen, in their view, to stay small. They did not understand that what I had chosen was to stay real. And they did not ask, because nobody at that table had ever thought to ask what happened in the building where the money came from. My grandfather had a heart attack on a Tuesday in March. I was in the shop. I was hand-fitting dovetails on a blanket chest for a client in Columbus. The wood was Pennsylvania cherry, tight-grained, a little stubborn, the kind of wood that makes you earn every joint. The radio was on. It was always on. My grandfather liked it tuned to the classical station out of Columbus, which played Beethoven at volumes that would have horrified Beethoven and Brahms at volumes that Brahms might have actually enjoyed. I heard the ambulance before anyone called me. The siren came up Ridgewater Road, and something in my chest knew before my phone rang that it was heading for the house at the top of the hill. The hospital was 11 minutes from the shop. I drove it in 7. I did not change. I was still wearing my overalls. I had glue on my left thumb and cherry dust in my hair, And I walked past the front desk, and a nurse looked at me, and I said his name, and she pointed down the hall without asking who I was. She knew. Everyone in Cordon knew Arthur Voss, and most of them knew I was the one who would come. He was in a bed that looked too small for him. His hands were on the sheet, and they looked wrong there, displaced, like tools left on a kitchen counter. Machines beeped beside him in rhythms that were too even, too mechanical, nothing like the rhythm of a shop. He saw me come in. His eyes moved to my overalls. He half smiled, the smile of a man who has checked for the one thing he needed to see and has found it. He said, "You're dressed for work." I said, "I'm always dressed for work, Grandpa." He told me to close the door. I did. He told me to sit. I sat. He looked at the ceiling for a moment like he was reading something written there that only he could see. Then he said 3 things. The first was that the blanket chest I was building should have through dovetails, not half blinds, because the client's grandmother had been a cabinet maker in Prague, and she would have known the difference, and she would have checked the joints first and the finish second, because that is what cabinet makers do. The second was that the Danish oil in the 3rd bay was running low, and I should order 2 more gallons from the supplier in Pennsylvania before April, because the spring orders always came in heavy and I would need the stock. The third was that he had made an arrangement a long time ago, a legal arrangement, something he had set up quietly, carefully, the way he set up a complicated joint. He said nobody in the family knew about it. He said it the way he said most important things, in a low voice, the way you read a measurement off a tape when the cut matters and there is no room for error. I asked him what kind of arrangement. He shook his head slowly. "Not yet. You will know when you need to know. I have made sure of that. Grandpa." He squeezed my hand. His grip was weaker than I had ever felt it, weaker than I had imagined it could be. But it was still the grip of a man who had spent 53 years holding things that mattered and had learned exactly how much pressure to apply. He held my hand the way he held a chisel, with intent, with knowledge, with the understanding that the thing in his hand had a purpose that would outlast his use of it. He died 6 days later. A Thursday, 4:12 in the morning. I was asleep in the chair beside his bed. I had been there every night since the hospital. I woke because the room changed. Not the sound, not the light, the weight of it. Something that had been holding the room together had been quietly set down, like a finished piece carried out of the shop for the last time. The space it left was not empty. It was completed. I sat with him for 20 minutes. I did not call anyone yet. I sat with him the way you sit in a workshop after the last piece has been finished, and the sawdust has settled, and the tools have been put away, and the only sound is the building cooling around you. A kind of sacred silence, the silence of something done right. Then I called my father. My father cried, briefly. Then he asked me to find the keys to the shop safe. That was the order. Grief, then keys. I noted it. I did not judge it out loud. I noted it the way I note a flaw in a board, quietly, for later. My mother planned the funeral like she planned the annual board dinner. Catering, seating chart, a printed program on heavy cardstock with a photograph of my grandfather on the cover that Phoebe had taken 3 years earlier, in which he looked clean and dignified and nothing like himself. Elliot gave a eulogy that mentioned the word legacy 9 times, and the word craftsman twice, and the word wood 0 times. He talked about vision. He talked about foundation. He talked about carrying the torch. He did not mention the overalls. He did not mention the hand plane. He did not mention the V inside the circle. He did not know about it. Phoebe filmed the casket being lowered into the ground. She posted it that evening with a black and white filter and a thin white border. The caption said, "Forever in our grain." It received 4,200 likes. I did not like it. I did not comment. I closed the app and I put my phone in the drawer, and I went out to the creek bed behind the hill where my grandfather had pulled his first board in 1971. I walked into the water in my boots. I did not care about the boots. I found a piece of black walnut driftwood lodged against the bank. I pulled it loose. I carried it back to the shop. I planed it by hand in the dark, by touch alone, the way he had taught me to feel a surface without looking at it. I planed it until it was smooth. I did not turn the lights on. I did not need to. My hands knew what to do. They had always known. I kept the piece. I put it on the shelf above my bench. It is still there. Nobody has asked about it. Nobody has needed to. 2 weeks after the funeral, my father gathered the family in the carpeted office. He sat behind the desk my grandfather had built in 1989 out of quarter-sawn white oak with hand-cut mortise and tenon joints and a finish so deep you could see your reflection in it. My father had never once oiled that desk. There was a coffee ring on the left corner that had been there for 2 years, a pale white ghost of a mug pressed into wood that deserved better. He sat behind it like a man who had inherited a throne and mistaken it for a chair. He told us the plan. Elliot would take over as president. Phoebe would expand the brand into lifestyle content and partnerships. The shop would shift toward what my father called production efficiency, a phrase that meant nothing to anyone who had ever built anything by hand. I would continue as shop lead. My role, he said, would not change. He said it the way you say something you have already decided is unimportant, quickly, without looking at the person it applies to. I sat in a folding chair against the wall. Elliot sat in the leather chair my father had bought for the office in 2012. It was a chair made of bonded leather and particle board. It had cost $600 and would not last 5 years. My grandfather's chairs, the ones he built for $200 in materials and 40 hours of labor, were in homes across 3 states and would outlast every person sitting in this room. Phoebe sat on the windowsill, scrolling her phone with her legs crossed. She was wearing boots that cost more than my monthly tool budget. I asked one question. What about Grandpa's clients? The custom commissions. The ones who come back every 3 years. The ones who ask for me by name. My father waved his hand. The wave he used when he was dismissing something he had not thought about and did not intend to think about. We are moving away from that model. Custom is slow. Custom is unpredictable. Elliot has a plan for a product line, modular shelving, flat pack friendly, retail ready. I looked at my brother. Elliot was nodding the way he nodded in meetings, with his chin slightly raised, as if the idea had been his all along, which it had, and as if that made it good, which it did not. I want to be clear about something. The thing my grandfather had spent 53 years building was not a product line. It was not a brand. It was not an aesthetic or a social media presence or a scalability framework. It was a reputation. A reputation built one joint at a time, one finish at a time, one client who came back because the drawer still closed perfectly after 20 years at a time. Reputations do not come in flat packs. They do not ship in boxes. They do not scale. They survive. That is the difference. My brother did not know the difference. My father had forgotten it. My grandfather had died trying to remind them. I said nothing else in that meeting. I went back to the shop. I finished the blanket chest. Threw dovetails, just like he told me. I oiled it 3 times. I signed the inside of the bottom drawer, the small V inside the circle. I ran my thumb over it, and I shipped it to Columbus. Things moved quickly after that, and everything they moved toward was worse. Elliot signed a deal with a regional furniture chain called Homeset within his first month as president. 60 units a month. The specs called for particle board cores with veneer faces, veneer, on pieces that carried the Voss name. My grandfather would have walked out of the building. He would have walked out, and he would not have come back, and he would have been right. The shop floor, which had smelled like walnut and cedar and linseed oil for 40 years, began to smell like contact adhesive and packing foam and the particular chemical sweetness of engineered wood that has never been alive. 2 of my craftsmen quit within the first 3 months. Carl, who had been with us for 11 years and who could hand-cut a mortise faster than the machine could route one, cleaned his bench on a Friday afternoon. He sharpened every tool. He hung his apron on the hook. He shook my hand. He said, "I'm sorry, Margot." He drove away. He did not look back. Jake left 2 weeks later. Same way, same quiet. Woodworkers do not slam doors. They close them flush and they walk away, and the only sound they leave behind is the absence of their hands. My father stopped coming to the shop entirely. He worked from the carpeted office. He took calls. He played golf on Wednesdays with a man named Dale who sold commercial insurance and who laughed at everything my father said. Elliot sent memos. He sent a great number of memos. One of them, dated October 14th, suggested I standardize my finishing process to reduce per-unit labor costs by 22%. I read the memo standing next to a dining table I had spent 4 days hand-rubbing with tongue oil because the client, a retired music teacher in Dayton, had asked for a finish you could feel the grain through when you ran your fingertips across it. She had said she wanted to feel the tree. I had understood exactly what she meant. Elliot's memo did not understand what she meant. Elliot's memo did not know she existed. I folded the memo. I put it in the pocket of my overalls. It went through the wash on Sunday. I found it Monday morning, pulped and shapeless, and stuck to the inside of the pocket like a piece of bark. That seemed about right. The annual board dinner was in September. Every year, the family dressed up and sat at a long table in a private room at the restaurant on 5th Street with the company's accountant, the insurance broker, 2 clients my father considered important, and the bank officer who handled the business line of credit. It was the one night a year the family pretended Voss and Sons was a corporation instead of a family argument with a loading dock. I had never attended. I had never been invited. Not once in 12 years. I had always known about it the way you know about a room in your own house that you are not welcome in. You walk past the door. You hear the voices. You hear the laughter. You hear someone say your last name in a sentence that does not include your first. You keep walking. That year, something shifted. I cannot tell you exactly what it was. Maybe it was the blanket chest and the through dovetails and the way my grandfather's voice had sounded when he told me to use them. Maybe it was the 2 empty workbenches in the shop where Carl and Jake used to stand, benches I had not been able to bring myself to reassign. Maybe it was Elliot's memo. Maybe it was 12 years of signing the inside of drawers that nobody would ever pull open far enough to see. Maybe it was the coffee ring on my grandfather's desk that nobody had bothered to repair. I do not know which one it was. I think it was all of them. I think they had been accumulating the way sawdust accumulates in the corners of a shop, quietly, steadily, until one day you look down and you realize you are standing in it. I drove to the restaurant. I parked in the back lot next to my brother's leased Audi. I walked in through the front door in my canvas overalls, tobacco brown, the same brand my grandfather wore, sawdust on the cuffs, linseed oil on my fingers. I had not changed. I had not washed my hands. I had come directly from the shop where I had been working on a sideboard in white oak for a client who had been waiting 5 weeks and who deserved my best hours, not my last ones. The hostess looked at me the way hostesses look at people who have entered through the wrong door. She was going to redirect me. I could see it forming. I said my last name. She checked the reservation list. I was not on it. I said my name again, slower, and I told her which party. She let me through. She did not smile. She did not need to. The table was long and white and lit by low-hanging pendant lights that made everyone look like they were being gently interrogated. Elliot was mid-sentence. He was talking about Q3 margins. He used the word trajectory. He stopped when he saw me. His face did a thing I had seen it do many times, the rapid calculation of a man deciding how to frame an interruption he had not prepared for. He chose comedy. He always chose comedy when he was uncomfortable. Somebody let the help in. 11 people looked at me. Some laughed. The accountant laughed. One of the clients laughed. My mother looked at her wine glass and smiled the small, tight smile she used when something embarrassed her, but she could not say so in front of company. Phoebe raised her phone. I heard the small click of a camera shutter. My father looked at me for 1 second and then looked at the breadbasket. He did not laugh. He did not speak. He simply redirected his attention the way he had redirected his attention away from me for 34 years. I pulled out the empty chair at the end of the table. The legs scraped the floor. I sat down. I pulled the breadbasket toward me, and I tore off a piece of sourdough, and I ate it slowly. And I did not say a word for the rest of the dinner. Not one word. Not because I had nothing to say. Not because I was afraid. Because I was learning something my grandfather had always known. The person who built the table does not need to fight for a seat at it. She only needs to know that she built it. If you have ever sat at a table where nobody saved you a chair, like this video and tell me about it. I see you. Stay with me. I drove home that night with the windows cracked. The air smelled like September, like the first edge of something turning. I did not feel humiliated. I had expected to feel humiliated. I had braced for it the way you brace when you are about to test a joint under pressure. But sitting there in my overalls while my brother called me the help had done something I had not anticipated. It had made everything perfectly clear, like wiping a coat of dust off a joint and seeing for the first time whether it is tight or whether it has a gap. The joint had a gap. It had always had a gap. I had been filling it with my own labor for 12 years and calling it loyalty. The lawyer arrived the next morning at 7:15 a.m. I was already in the shop. The lights were on. The coffee was made in the old pot. The radio was playing something by Dvorak that my grandfather would have turned up and that I had turned down because I was reading a cut list and needed the quiet. I heard a car pull into the gravel lot. Not a truck, a sedan. Clean, dark, out of place the way a new book looks on a shelf of old ones. A man got out. He was tall. He wore a gray suit that did not belong within 100 yards of a table saw. He carried a leather briefcase that looked older than he was and better made than anything in the carpeted office across the lot. He stood in the doorway of the shop the way people stand in doorways when they are not sure the floor is meant for them. He looked at me. I was holding a hand plane. I had a shaving curled over my wrist like a pale ribbon. "Are you Margot Voss?" "I am. My name is Peter Ellison. I am an attorney. I represent the estate of Arthur Voss in a matter separate from the general probate proceedings your family is currently engaged in. May I come in?" I set the plane down on the bench. I wiped my hands on the shop rag. I poured him a cup of coffee in the mug my grandfather kept for visitors, the one with the chipped handle and the faded logo from a hardware store called Brannigan's that had closed in 1994. Nobody had ever replaced the mug. Nobody had ever suggested it. Peter Ellison sat on the stool by the finishing station. He set his briefcase on the workbench. He opened it carefully, the way a person opens something near tools they respect. He pulled out a brown envelope. He placed it on the bench between the wood plane and a half-empty can of Danish oil. Then he looked at me and he said 4 sentences. "Your grandfather came to me in 2019. He executed a legal trust transferring full ownership of every original furniture design he created under the Voss & Sons name. 147 designs in total, including all specifications, joinery drawings, and proprietary finishing methods. You are the sole trustee and sole beneficiary." The shop went quiet. The Dvorak had ended. The radio was between movements. The compressor in the back bay ticked down the way it always ticked when it cycled off. A slow, metallic heartbeat I had been hearing since I was 9 years old. I looked at the envelope. I looked at the coffee in his hand. I looked at the wood plane on the bench. "I don't understand. Miss Voss, every table, every cabinet, every chair, every desk, every sideboard your grandfather ever designed. The drawings, the measurements, the proprietary joinery methods, the finishing sequences. They do not belong to the company. They belong to you. They have belonged to you since August of 2019. Your grandfather spent 2 years making sure of it. He knew." I did not finish the sentence. I did not need to. Peter Ellison nodded anyway. "Your grandfather told me something when he signed the trust documents. He said, 'The boy will sell the name. The girl will keep the work. Make sure the work is protected.' I gave him my word. This envelope is me keeping it." I drank my coffee. My hand was steady. The mug was warm. The chipped handle fit my thumb the way it had always fit his. I asked Peter Ellison to explain what this meant in practice. He did. Clearly. Without jargon. In the language of a man who understood that the person across from him thought in measurements, not in briefs. Every design that Voss and Sons currently manufactured, every product in the catalog, every commission template, every joint profile and finishing specification my grandfather had developed over 53 years was held in the trust. The company had been operating under an implied license that had never been put in writing. If the trustee, me, chose to revoke that license, the company could not legally produce a single piece based on those designs. Not the modular shelving Elliot was selling to Homeset, not the signature dining tables, not the blanket chests, not the sideboards. All of them derived from Arthur Voss's original work, all of them mine. I set the mug down carefully on the bench. Peter Ellison watched me the way a person watches someone pick up something fragile. "I'm not going to do anything yet," I said. "Take your time." He closed his briefcase. He stood up. He left his card on the bench beside the Danish oil. He shook my hand. He drove away. The gravel popped under his tires. I stood in the shop for a long time. I picked the wood plane back up. I ran my thumb along the blade. It was sharp. It was always sharp. My grandfather had taught me to sharpen it every morning before the first cut, not because it needed sharpening every morning, because the ritual was the point, the discipline of it, the repetition of care, the daily promise you make to the tool that you will not waste what it can do. I sharpened it that morning. I sharpened it the next morning. I have sharpened it every morning since. If you are still here with me, if you know what it feels like to learn you were seen by someone who is no longer here to thank, give this story a like. Stay with me. What comes next is the part that changed everything. I did not tell my family for 3 months. I went to work every morning. I opened the shop. I ran the cut lists. I trained the one apprentice who had stayed, a 22-year-old woman named Reese, who had the same look in her eyes that I imagined I had when I first picked up a chisel. I finished commissions. I signed the inside of every drawer. I attended no meetings. I was invited to no dinners. I existed in the building that made the money that funded the building across the parking lot, where people in carpeted rooms talked about trajectory. During those 3 months, I did 2 things quietly. First, I met with Peter Ellison 4 more times. We reviewed every page of the trust. We confirmed every filing. We verified that the documentation was complete and airtight, which it was, because my grandfather had spent money on a good lawyer the way he spent money on good wood, once, correctly, without cutting corners. He had paid Peter Ellison the way he paid for quarter-sawn white oak, full price, no negotiation, because the quality justified it. Second, I began to keep a log. I bought a leather notebook from the stationery store on Main Street, small, brown, the kind of notebook that fits in an overall pocket. Every piece that left the shop, I wrote down. Every design it was based on, I recorded. Every hour I worked, I logged. I wrote each entry by hand, in pencil, the way my grandfather had taught me to mark a measurement, clearly, precisely, so it could be read by someone who was not there when the mark was made. By December, the notebook had 312 entries, each one dated, each one initialed, each one a quiet line of proof that I had been the one holding the chisel while my brother held the microphone. Elliot announced in January that he had signed a deal with a national furniture retailer, 200 units a month. The designs were my grandfather's. The production would require outsourcing most of the work to a contract factory in North Carolina because the shop could not handle the volume and because, frankly, the shop was no longer the point. The shop was the backdrop. The brand was the product. My grandfather's name was the ingredient, and my brother intended to dilute it until it meant nothing more than a sticker on a box. I heard about the deal from Diane. She told me in the parking lot between the 2 buildings on a Tuesday morning, with her coat pulled tight and her breath coming out in small clouds. She had the careful face of a woman who had spent 15 years watching something built with love get sold by people who had never held a hammer. "They're using all the shop designs?" I asked. "The whole catalog. He's licensing the name too." I thanked her. I went back inside. I called Peter Ellison. I told him. He was quiet for a long moment. I could hear him breathing. A patient, measured breath. "Miss Voss, do you want me to send the letter?" "Not yet. I want to try one thing first." I went to see my father. He was behind the desk. The coffee ring was still there. I sat across from him in the chair that clients sat in, the chair I had never once sat in before, and I told him what I knew. I told him the designs belonged to me. I told him Grandpa had moved them into a trust. I told him the company had been operating on a license that did not exist on paper. My father looked at me the way he looked at tools he did not understand. Something useful but outside his area. He told me it was impossible. He told me his father would never have done this behind his back. He told me to bring my paperwork to the next board dinner and we would discuss it. He said the word paperwork the way Elliot had said the word help. The second board dinner I attended was different from the first. This time I had been invited, or summoned. Elliot had called me. Professional voice, controlled. The voice of a man who had been briefed and did not like what he had read. I wore my overalls. I carried the brown envelope. I carried my leather notebook. And when I walked into the restaurant, Peter Ellison was already sitting at the far end of the table. Gray suit, old briefcase. He had called the restaurant himself. He had added himself to the reservation. He looked at me when I walked in, and he nodded once. The nod of a man who had been waiting 5 years to keep a promise. Elliot talked first. He talked about the national deal. He talked about growth. He used the word scalable 3 times. Then he looked at me. He invited me to share my concerns. Peter Ellison set his coffee down. He introduced himself. He explained the trust. He named the number. 147 designs. He placed the folder on the tablecloth. The accountant read the documents. 4 minutes. He looked up. He looked at my father. "These appear to be in order, Tom." The room went still. My mother spoke. She asked if we could talk about this at home. I told her we were not at home. We were at a business dinner. This was business. Elliot said I was going to destroy the family. I looked at him across the white tablecloth. I looked at my father. I looked at my mother. I looked at Phoebe, whose phone was for once face down on the table. I have not destroyed anything. I have built things in this family. Every single day. For 12 years. I have built them with my hands while you sold them with your mouth. Grandpa knew the difference. That is why he did what he did. Peter Ellison shook my hand in the parking lot afterward. He did not say good luck. He said, "Your grandfather would have liked the overalls tonight." Elliot hired a lawyer within 48 hours. The filing alleged the trust was created under duress, that my grandfather had been in cognitive decline, that I had coerced him. Peter had anticipated this. My grandfather had anticipated it. Inside the trust file were 3 cognitive evaluations performed over 3 years by his personal physician. All clean, all signed, all witnessed. My grandfather had known that someone would someday try to call him confused. He had spent years making sure the record said otherwise. The challenge was dismissed in 4 months. The judge wrote in her opinion that the grantor demonstrated clear, sustained, and well-documented intent. She wrote that the court found no evidence of undue influence, only evidence of what she called undue neglect by those who now contested it. Undue neglect. The judge's words, not mine, but they fit like a dovetail. I licensed the designs back to the company, on my terms. Every piece produced under the Voss name would be built in the shop, not outsourced. Every piece would be finished by hand. Every piece would carry my grandfather's mark. The V inside the circle. The national deal was renegotiated. Smaller volume, higher quality. The retailer visited the shop. They watched Reese hand fit a joint. They watched me oil a tabletop. They signed the revised terms that afternoon. Elliot left the company in June. He cleared his desk. He took his nameplate off the door. He drove away in the leased Audi. I watched from the shop window. I did not wave. I did not feel triumphant. I felt the way you feel when you finish a long commission. Tired, satisfied, ready to sweep the floor and sharpen the blade and begin again in the morning. Phoebe stayed. She came to the shop one morning and asked if she could photograph the real work. Not the aesthetic, the real thing. The sweat and the grain that fights you, and the shavings on the floor, and the coffee that tastes like 1993. I said yes. Her photographs changed. They got quieter. They got honest. One of them, a close-up of my hand on a chisel with sawdust caught in the afternoon light, became the most shared image the company had ever posted. The caption was 3 words. She built this. My father came to the shop on a Saturday in October. He had not been in the shop in over a year. He stood in the doorway. He walked in slowly. He ran his hand along the workbench the way you run your hand along a railing in a house you grew up in. He picked up the wood plane. He held it. His face did something I had never seen it do. He was remembering who he could have been. He set it down. Your grandfather tried to teach me, he said. I would not learn. I know, Dad. He sat on the stool. He was quiet. He looked at the tools on the wall. He looked at the overalls on the hook. I thought selling was the hard part, he said. I thought making the thing was the simple part. It was never the simple part, Dad. He nodded. He stood. He walked to the door. He turned. You are better at this than I ever was. I should have said that a long time ago. I am saying it now. I will say it again. He left. The compressor ticked. The radio was off. I picked up the wood plane, and I went back to work. My father comes to the shop on Saturdays now. Every Saturday. He sits on the stool with a cup of coffee from the old pot. He watches me work. Sometimes he asks questions. Simple ones. Why this joint and not that one? Why oil instead of lacquer? Why I sharpen the blade every morning even when it does not need it? Because the ritual is the point, I tell him. He nods. He is learning. He is learning late. But the wood does not care about late. The wood only cares about who shows up. I still wear the overalls. Tobacco brown. Same brand. I replace them once a year. I wash them on Sundays. I iron them on Monday mornings. I sign every piece on the inside of the bottom drawer, the small V inside a circle. Nobody sees it. That is still the point. It was never for them. It was for the wood, and for the man who taught me that the wood remembers. If you have walked this far with me, if you have ever been the person who built the thing that someone else put their name on, tell me in the comments. Tell me what you built. Tell me what it cost you to build it quietly. Tell me the name of the person who should have seen you sooner. I read every single one, and I carry them with me the way I carry a pencil mark inside a drawer, quietly, permanently, in a place that matters even if nobody else opens it far enough to look. And if you are listening tonight in a shop of your own, or a kitchen, or a car, or a room where your work is drying and nobody has come to check on it, I want to tell you something my grandfather said to me the last time I saw him sharpening a blade. He held the steel up to the light. He turned it. He looked at the edge the way you look at something you trust. And he said, "The work knows who did it, Margot, even if nobody else does. You do not build a reputation for the people who are watching. You build it for the wood, and the wood does not forget." He was right. He was always right. And the overalls were never the costume. The suit was. Come back tomorrow. I have another story. It begins with a woman who found a receipt in a drawer that her husband said did not exist.